Welcome, everyone, to episode 69 of the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sammy Kinnison, joined by our co-host, Angela Belford. Today, we are going to be having we're going to be listening to a conversation that Angela actually had with one of our previous guests, Jamie Berris, on Jamie's podcast, Authentically Raw, where the conversation was just really rich. This gives a lot of information about even just Angela's background, the first book, all of these things. And we really wanted to be able to share that conversation with you all. So it's a little bit different format than what we normally do, but we really think that you guys can find a lot of value out of this. Angela, can you tell us a little bit more about what you guys talked about and why we think this would be valuable for Be Freaking Awesome?
Yeah, it was actually a really great conversation for a couple of reasons. Number one, when I first met Jamie, and had her on our podcast, we had a great conversation about writing yourself a permission slip. And then when I visited with her on her podcast, she had just read Be Freaking Awesome. And for those of you that don't know, I wrote that book 7 years ago, published it 6 years ago now. And sometimes in the life of an author, you think, oh, there's so much I've learned since then. There's so much. And so it was fantastic to have somebody that this was really fresh. And not only that, but because she's a life coach, for her to say, oh my goodness, I got so many things out of it. I have all of these nuggets. And I was like thinking I was on the podcast to talk about my upcoming book. She's like, no, we'll come back to that at some other point. But let's talk about this one. And so in it, we cover a range of topics. You hear a little bit more about my backstory for her listeners. So that will be not new for our listeners. We talk about fear of success. We talk about the difference between forgiveness versus reconciliation, which is interesting because I've had that conversation probably like 3 times in the last week or two, where we're talking about how people struggle with forgiveness and they think when a life coach or a friend encourages them to forgive the person, they think that means they have to go back into relationship with someone. And I just want to, in case people don't hear the whole thing, one of the ideas that is really I'm passionate about is this idea that people say, well, look, Jesus says we have to forgive 70 times 7. So I'm just supposed to put up with someone's abuse. And I don't think that way about forgiveness. I think about it like, if you've done something that impacts me long term, every time I have to deal with my life being different because of something you did that impacted me, then I may have to forgive you again. And so if you cut off my foot, every time I step off a curb, I fall down, I am mad that I don't have a foot. And so I may have to forgive you again. And so I think that's what Jesus is talking about with 70 times 7, because I also believe strongly in guard your heart. And so anyway, we also talk about the decisions that we make as children, which actually is kind of a preview of the next book. And then talk a little bit about you, Sammy, because we talk about perfectionism at a pretty high level. And so kind of dive into what it's like to be a recovering perfectionist that is parenting a recovering perfectionist, and sort of how I contributed to that. And so then how I can also be a supportive role in your journey of healing. So there's a lot. Those are just a couple of the highlights. I really hope people will take a minute and listen to the episode.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And if you have any questions, as always, you can email us. You can message us on Facebook or Instagram. You can subscribe to our email list to get more information. And for now, we hope you guys have a great time being freaking awesome while listening to this conversation with Angela and Jamie.
Hello, Angela. I am so excited to have you on the Authentically Raw podcast. I'm going to let you take away your introduction, but this is Angela Belford, author of Be Freaking Awesome. So tell us more about you.
Yeah. So in my book, Be Freaking Awesome, I kind of share a lot of my story of living with 4 families. Those highlights include hunger, homelessness, many episodes of sexual abuse. When I published it, 2 of my 3 children had graduated high school. I'd been married to my college sweetheart and business partner for 23 years, and I had a successful business for 18 years, been a public speaker for 20 years. People would often ask, how do you go from that dysfunctional childhood to this very high functioning life? And I wrote Be Freaking Awesome to answer that question. And I can tell you high points, you make a decision, you address your fears, you develop self-awareness, set goals in a different way, and you manage your mind. And after I published that book, I started having panic attacks for the first time in since I'd had my nervous breakdown 19 years earlier. And rather than address them, I thought, well, obviously panic attacks are bad, so I should stop doing what I'm doing. Maybe I should just end homelessness instead. And so I'm so entertained now by what the insanity that my brain does and did, because my story, I'd been a client of Salvation Army. So I became a homeless advocate for the last 5 years. That led me all the way to being the executive director of our local housing authority, which is really great for homelessness, but I upset the wrong people. And last year was actually fired publicly, went down in flames. It was not very fun. And from that have decided to continue my journey of personal development and actually understand what those panic attacks are about and how to get to the root cause. So I believe life is a journey and mine is ever turning.
I agree. You are not at your destination yet. We all arrive at our destination on our deathbed. So we have to stop trying to, run the race to get there. I want to back up just a little bit because I heard you, I pulled out all kinds of things, and I want to make sure everybody is aware of all of the amazing things that you do, because you're an author, you are a speaker, you do a lot of work with, the homeless. But you're also a life coach, and I believe you and your husband also run a marketing business.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, so we own the Belford Group. It is a marketing agency in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I this year returned as managing partner of that. So help businesses tell their story really well. And while I was taking time off after being fired, then I did get certified in as a life coach. What's funny is that for years, as a marketing consultant, I helped a lot of businesses get started, and people would like, Angela, when we hire you, it's kind of like having a coach. And I was like, no, I'm not a coach. I'm a consultant. You're going to pay me. I'm going to tell you what to do. And if you're smart, you'll listen to me. And if you're not, then you've just wasted your money and my time. And so I was pretty sass about that, the difference between consulting and coaching. And after getting my life coach certification and spending 6 months, very intense training and practice and 15 to 20 hours a week coaching people, I have come to the conclusion, I've been coaching people for about 12 years now. And so it turns out that I was a coach, but now I have the actual credentials to go with that. It's really so much about your mindset. And I think you cannot be a successful business person without having the right mindset. And so to me, they go so hand in hand. People say, oh my goodness, you're doing so many things. I'm like, yeah, they're all cohesive. It's all about what's your mindset and how do you communicate well? Those are kind of the bottom line for me. So if you look at marketing and branding, it's about communicating well. If you look at public speaking, it's about communicating well. And all of that comes as a basis of, is your mind right?
I'm going to pull out one thing that you said too. I loved. I don't think you can live a successful life without the right mindset. It's business. I think so many people think of success and their mind does go to business. But when we really stop to think about it, a successful life is that relationship with yourself. What is success in your relationships with your family, your friends, your coworkers? What does a successful relationship look like with your body, or with food, or with money, or your faith? I mean, success runs in every area, and it all revolves around our mindset. So I love that you pulled that out. So with your coaching, I relate to. I knew that I was coaching people for decades before I actually went and got certified. And then when you're in the training and everything, you're like, oh my goodness, I've been doing this. I can't say I was doing it necessarily the correct way, but we tried, right? And now we know the correct way. And it's the results that we can get, for people, they can get are amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about your book, if that's okay, your first book. And the Be Freaking Awesome book. And just quick note in there that you're writing the second one that is out in 2023, correct? Awesome. So I pulled out a few things that I just loved, and I was hoping that you could just unpack on them a little bit more. One of the lines about forgiveness that you had said was, anytime we carry unforgiveness, we carry on their abuse. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah. I think people think forgiveness, often we think forgiveness is something someone asks for before we give it to them. And really, and I'm going to be, somewhat cliche, but the reason why things become cliche is because they're true. But really, forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the prison. And it's not denying the abuse. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, you want me to just deny that it happened. No, I don't want you to deny what happened. I want you to accept this happened to me and it changed me forever. And now I've become a different version of myself. A lot about integrating trauma. If you read very much about it, it talks about one of the most important aspects of it is to assign meaning that serves you. And so if you can begin to say and find the appreciation of the things that you now know about yourself, the character traits you now know about yourself, that nobody wanted it to happen. Nobody wanted the abuse or the hurt to happen. But now that it did, you've probably learned you're resilient. You've probably learned that you can do hard things. You've probably learned that you can overcome. And you may have learned some skills in the process. I lived with 4 different families, and I used to think that was a great tragedy. And now I know that all of my sales ability comes from living in 4 different families, because I had to learn all these different personality types. I had to really work hard to get my needs met. And it wasn't, most of the people I lived with didn't birth me. I only lived with the person that birthed me for a year and a half. And so I did live for another couple of years with with my grandmother, who gave birth to the person that gave birth. But still, there wasn't a lot of the genetic protection method of people taking care of you. And so you had to really understand getting your needs met. And so I came to appreciate what good came from that. Now, the way that my stepdad touched me, people could say oh, you're saying there's good that can come of that. No, but I learned how to be able to be there for myself. I learned how to not abandon myself. And so from that terrible experience, I developed some skills that I can now use in ways that can make my life positive. That resilience that I learned can now improve my life. The other thing I think that people think about forgiveness that I've found to be inaccurate is people think that forgiveness is one and done. And for me, it wasn't one and done. For me, I had to, anytime I felt like my life was different as a result of the harm that I had been inflicted on me, I had to forgive again. So the analogy I use is if somebody cuts off your foot and you forgive them for cutting off your foot, and then a year later you step off the curb and you fall in the street because you don't have a foot and now you've skinned your leg, you may have to forgive again when you fall off the curb. And so for me, that looked like with my stepdad, that the way he touched me, the first few years of my marriage, it wasn't safe for my husband to touch me in certain ways. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes I was fine. And so any time that I didn't react in the way that I would have reacted if I had been whole to begin with and not had that experience, I had to forgive him again. I have a beautiful end of the story is that, at my grandfather's funeral, my stepdad actually apologized to me and asked for forgiveness for the first time in 25 years. And he said, I just don't know but I just hope that you'll forgive me. And I'm like, I forgave you 15 years ago. It took me 10 years to forgive, but I did the work. And I said, now you have to forgive yourself. And I'm not sure he ever did before he passed.
That's tough. Oh, he said so many wonderful things. One thing I kept thinking of when you spoke is when we talked about mindset and with forgiveness, well, I should back up. First off, you were a victim, and denying that, you can't do that because it wasn't your fault. You were a victim. But I think such a big part of forgiveness is the conscious decision to say, I'm not going to remain in a victim mindset for the rest of my life, because that is what keeps you a prisoner to that person and their abuse. Because they're just going to keep abusing you over and over again in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Until we decide, okay, I was a victim. I'm no longer going to be victimized. And it does take a lot of work, like you said. But that forgiveness is unhooking from that other person. Like you can't continue to abuse or hurt me anymore. I love the fact that you pointed out when your stepdad came to you and asked for forgiveness, you said, I already did. Because I feel like so many of us wait around expecting that other person to apologize, say they're sorry, and then we can forgive. And anybody can say sorry or I apologize, and it can have zero meaning. And when it's forced out of someone, it doesn't make the process easier. It's really in you.
Ironically, when he said it, I didn't have a lot of emotion around it. I didn't feel a whole lot. I felt a lot of compassion because I could see he was in pain. I could see that he had finally reconciled. I had confronted him several times throughout the years and had heard through my brothers who had heard from their stepmom, his second. She's like, I don't know what Angela is saying, but can you ask her to stop? Because it's really miserable for her two children and her after I would confront him. And so I actually stopped confronting him out of just kindness to his current family, because I was in my 20s. I just wanted you to acknowledge it. I want you to acknowledge that this happened. Because he would say, I'm sorry, your childhood was not as you expected. And I'm just like, that's not an apology. Anyway, but I came to the realization that, like, what was he ever going to say to make it right? He was never going to be able to say anything to make it right. He couldn't give me that back. I worked through, like, it was my fault. I would see pictures of myself from that time frame and be like, oh, well, if you wouldn't have worn that outfit, then maybe, all of those things. So I went through the whole range of grief I now can see. And in the end, it's just a conscious decision to not only forgive and release myself from that, but to also like I said, forgive again. And after a number of years, I mean, I think it took me 4 or 5 years of forgiving even the consequences, that it doesn't bother me. And I think that's another thing. People think, well, I'm always going to be flawed. Well, yeah, your foot got cut off. So you can be mad about it for the rest of your life, or you can go get fitted for prosthetics and you can learn to walk again, and and those things, like, do you want to stay stuck there? I didn't want to stay stuck there. I didn't want my sex life, quite frankly, to be impacted by this. I wanted to have joy and success and happiness in all the ways that were possible.
Mhm. One thing I was thinking of is how you mentioned, and I think we all feel this, is just acknowledge it happened. Like, you did this. And I found myself doing that too. It's like you bring something up that happened even years and years ago, and then it's met with not what you want it to be, right? Whether it's denial, or they downplay it, or will you do this too, or whatever, and it just pours salt into the wound.
Mhm.
But I finally realized too, through my growth process with forgiveness, is that I was seeking validation, because and what I really needed to do is just validate it within myself. It happened. I feel it, regardless of whether they meant to or what their intention was. It happened. I don't need them to acknowledge it. And that takes a lot of work.
It does. I want to contrast my experience with what I consider the pinnacle. I mean, this for me is the ultimate parenting win for me.
Mhm.
So my daughter, this is several years ago, and she is telling me about this situation at work where she has coming to realize that she's a perfectionist. At this point, she was in her mid-20s, and her friend at work has like picked up on this sense that she's like, Sammy, do you think you have to be perfect to be loved? And she's like, I think so. And she goes, where did that come from? And the funny thing is that the friend that was pushing her, I had done some mentoring sessions with this friend, as just like we'd gone to coffee and we have a similar backstory. So this friend knew me and was kind of pushing Sammy, like, well, where did that come from? What do you think that is? What's that going on? And Sammy finally, just like, in that moment when your friend is asking you the hard question, the truth falls out, says, I don't know, maybe my mom needed me to be perfect. And she's horrified that she has just said this thing. And she comes to me and she's like, Mom, I really want to talk about this thing. And I remember, like, she wanted to, like, even get, like, we literally were sitting in, she's like, I want to talk to you. We went and sat in my bed, and it was sweet because she wanted to, like, make sure we were in this sweet, nurturing place. And she's telling me the story, and she's like, kind of sheepish about, like, I'm really sorry I made you look bad in front of this person, or, is the tone she was using. And she goes, I don't know where that came from. And I go, well, it's 100% true, honey. I absolutely, my nervous breakdown came when she was 3 years old. I'm like, or 4. I needed you to be perfect to prove I was okay. Your message from birth to 3 or 4 was like, you have to be perfect. You have to do things right. You have to act just right. I said, you absolutely got that message from me. And I said, I've been telling you since you were 12, you don't have to be perfect anymore. She used to, when she was a teenager, make such fun of me. Mom, please stop talking about yourself in third person. Because I'm like, your mother doesn't need for you to be perfect. It is okay. You are a human. And so I was trying to encourage her in this for 10 years. I had been trying to encourage her on this perfectionism journey. She kind of, as we do, forget. But in that moment, I was able to say, I did that. I caused that pain. I caused that wound. And I'm sorry. And I've asked you for forgiveness. I'll continue to ask. If you need me to say something, I will be happy to say something. But here's the thing, baby. It is your responsibility to heal. I caused the wound. You have to heal from it. That's your work. That's your journey. I can't heal you. I can only apologize. And I think that's where parents mess up too, is when their kids come and they come back to them and they're like, well, I was just doing the best I can. I'm like, no, just own it. Yep, I did that. I was doing the best I could. What do you need to hear from me? But the healing is yours to do.
100% agree. And I think it does go back to that validating and invalidating, because so often people will come to you with things like that. Your daughter put a lot of effort into approaching this in a loving way, and you could have invalidated her. It wasn't your intention to hurt her. It wasn't your intention to make her a perfectionist, something now she has to work on, in her adult life. No parent intentionally wants to go and do that. But just by validating it, I'm sorry, please point this out to me, and I love that you put the responsibility on her shoulders. I think I did play a part in creating this in you. It is your job to heal now. I'm here. Can I help?
Yes, because if I would have made it about me, because the other response people get is, I know, I'm so sorry, baby. I messed you all up. Well, now the kid has to come and comfort me. They've now, feel like they've made me feel bad. But I was able to stand in my strength and be like, yes, I did that. I'm really sorry. How can I help you now? I will walk through this with you. Whatever you need to rail, you need to whatever, I will rail. But people do not make it about yourself. Your kid comes to you and has a thing, just love them through it. Man, that must have been so hard. There have been times that they tell me I did stuff and I'm like, that's not what happened. She was 12 when I said, I'm going to write down what happened so that way when you talk to your therapist, you'll know the real story and not the made up story that you're putting in your head. She goes, Mom, you should not affirm that we need therapy. I'm like, you're raised by humans. You absolutely going to need some therapy. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
There's not a single person on earth that doesn't.
Yes, 100%.
And I agree with, the parent that all of a sudden makes it about them, and, whether they get angry or they play the sad, they put the guilt trip, they're crying, or they're go up in rage, whatever it is, again, here's my emotions that you caused. Now you need to manage. And that is impossible for anyone else to do, especially a kid. And what a great way to ruin a relationship and have that parent-child relationship just be cut, because pretty soon our kids, they stop sharing with us, because not their job. It's not their responsibility to handle the emotion, our emotions. And yeah, I mean, it's not, I want to back up one little thing. You mentioned earlier about, resilience, and it got me thinking, even with the parent-child relationship, I hate the phrase, kids are resilient. I feel like it's a cop-out for parents. Well, it doesn't matter what I do. You're resilient. You'll be fine. You'll forget about it. No. That is why we have mental health issues as adults. This is why we have people that don't know how to handle and manage their emotions. This is why, it's a $1 billion industry for antidepressants and all of these drugs, and because we weren't taught these things as kids. You can't just, because you're a kid, you're going to be resilient. No, when you go through trauma as a child, you don't just become an adult that is trauma-free. You have to, as an adult, and work through that trauma. You have done that.
Let me, Can
you tie that in, your answer, with the compassion that you feel? Because I think it's really I want you to point out and elaborate how you are resilient now. And when you were in the presence of your stepfather, when he's still alive, there was a time when you were in his presence that I can only imagine the feelings that were inside of you. And then once you forgave, those feelings, those horrible negative feelings, they were gone.
I have a couple of things. Number one is that there is a difference between forgiveness and restoring relationship, because even though I forgave him, I didn't restore relationship with my stepfather. I hadn't, and he was my ex-stepdad, like, just so we're clear, like, but his parents were still my grandparents. And so he, as soon as he asked for forgiveness, was like, okay, now we're going back to the way we were when you were 14 and we were close. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I do still think, and I believe strongly in the Bible verse that says to guard our heart. So just because you forgive somebody does not mean you have to give them open access to continue to abuse them. I believe that in boundaries, I believe when people, if they're not going to know better and do better, then it is your responsibility to protect yourself. So that's one thing. The other thing is, speaking of childhood trauma, so Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps Score talks about that the definition of trauma is anything that our brain can't make sense of. And the reason why I love this definition is because there are people who have so much harder stories than mine, and people who have less stories of trauma than mine, and people that have harder stories have reconciled faster than I did, may not have taken 10 years, and it's because their brain made sense of it. And people that have had less trauma, air quotes, less traumatic experiences, maybe didn't get over it because they just never got to make sense of it. But here's the thing with that definition that I am really hammering in my new book, Traveling Lighter, is that as children, our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that makes sense of things, isn't fully developed. It doesn't fully develop until like 25, right? And so we're using emotion to make sense of the world, and we're depending on our caretakers to give us the sense making of what is happening. And so I believe that there are things that happen to us as children that an adult or a therapist would not classify as trauma, capital T trauma, the abuse and homelessness that I've experienced. But that when you're a little kid, when you don't get invited to the sleepover in 5th grade, and you can't understand it, and the parents around you are like, oh, screw all those people, who cares about them, you don't need them anyway, like that doesn't help you make sense of what is happening, right? And so we begin to like make sense and believe all of these terrible things about ourselves, about like, oh, well, I don't belong, and maybe I'm not lovable, and maybe I'm not worthy, or, there are all these crazy ideas that we start to believe because that's all our little kid brain can comprehend. It's like the people who their parents get a divorce and they think it's their fault. And as adults, we can go, that doesn't make any sense. But to a little kid, it does make sense. Oh my gosh, my parents, I got in trouble and I got grounded. And then 2 weeks later, my parents got a divorce. It must be my fault, right? Like there's no logic to little kid brain. And so I think we have to really think about like the ways that we are that maybe aren't serving us today. Did we become those ways that we are? I'm too scared to speak up in public. I'm too scared, whatever, to put myself out there. We became that because when we were a little kid, it was dangerous to speak up. It was dangerous. We got made fun of when we stood up and stuttered in 5th grade, right? So then we decide the rest of our life. And my idea is to unpack all that and just decide, is this serving you? Is it serving you to live this small life based on the decisions you made as an 8-year-old?
Yeah. And it is what keeps us stuck, because without really even having that awareness that we've decided that we want to stay stuck there, so many of us are in so many different areas with all these fears that were there to protect and serve us at a time in our life.
That's right.
Like when we were small children, but we aren't anymore.
Yeah.
I wrote down one thing too. When you talked about the word reconciliation popped up for me, because when you talked about, your relationship with your stepdad, it's like, okay, or whoever it is in your life, maybe that person you have forgiven, that person truly wants to be forgiven. They truly apologize, but it's that guarding of yourself. Sometimes reconciliation isn't an option to go back, because I've had that, like where there's relationships where there's been things that years and years and years of stuff has built up, and then you finally get the courage to put some distance there or do things, and you have moved forward. You've forgiven, you've got that compassion. I no longer feel all this like angst over it. I'm at peace with it. But I know reconciliation and entering back into that close relationship or trying what we had before, it's just not an option.
Yeah. And I talk about, like with him specifically, I said, I'm going to be looking at how you have a relationship with your biological sons. Like, what is that relationship like? And how are you treating them? And how are you treating your current people that have stayed in your life? And if you are acting in a way that I appreciate and want in my life, then yeah, we'll ease our way back into it. But it's going to take time for us to build trust. And our brains love efficiency. And so we love black and white thinking. And so we love all or nothingness, like either we're talking or we're not talking, or and it's not ever like that. It's never completely yes, completely no. I mean, rarely is it completely yes, completely no. Not to say that you can't put a hard boundary and say, no, right now, there's no possibility. And yet, I think if a year or two goes by, I'm thinking of a different relationship I have where a family member that we didn't talk for 5 or 6 years, and I would check in like once a year and like talk on the phone for a couple of minutes, and they were still really angry and still stuck in their grief. And I just like, that's not what I need in my life right now. And now it's so fascinating because here we are. It's been like 12 years and we are finally completely reconciled. And I recently went and spent like a whole day with this family member that I had kind of thought I'd lost forever because they are at an age that I didn't know that we would ever reconcile. And I asked them what changed, and they said I just had to just finally let go of all the anger. And they had to get okay with themselves before they could be in relationship with me, because I didn't want all of the negativity and the anger and the hostility that they just were generating. So it is a weird and tricky balance. And I think there's some easing through, especially when it's family members, to like be able to be careful about that, like that I'm going to write them off forever. You may have to just ease in from time to time to check in to see how things are, and keep those solid boundaries if they show that they have changed. Because people, while I love to say when people show you who they are, believe them, we also change. We also evolve. We also grow, and things happen, and people get sick and people die. And I just wonder if that person died at this moment, would I have any regrets? Would I be able to and if I've done my forgiveness work and I've checked on them, sometimes I check on them through other family members, then you just kind of walk through that with a lot of awareness and a lot of self-care.
The 2 words that kind of popped out to me were the trust and the control. And when you mentioned, it takes time to build trust back up. But I think a lot of it too is we fail to recognize that we need to build the trust back in ourselves. Because, we do have to trust ourselves to listen to our intuition. And if it felt right for you to check in once a year, or if it wasn't feeling right, and you can't control and force that other person to respond the way you want them to. You may have trusted yourself to reach out and make that phone call, just checking in. You didn't get the response that you wanted, but you can't control that. And the only thing you can control is you. And if it felt right for you to reach out that time, you trusted yourself. That's all you can control. Let it go if they're not ready. It's so hard. Go ahead.
Well, I also want to talk about expectations, because I think there's boundaries and then there's our expectations. Like there's a difference between this person has to act exactly like I want them to act, and otherwise I won't be in a relationship. And I don't think that, Brooke Castile, who I did my training under, she calls that having a manual for somebody. Like, if you do X, Y, Z, then I will be in a relationship with you. And that's very different. Someone having to act the way you want them to. I think we get into this with parent-child a lot. Before I will have a relationship. Be careful on that, because that's a very slippery slope. You can also be at a point where you have to just accept that this person is like this, my brother is former Army, 20-year Army veteran. And if I said, oh my goodness, if you ever say a cuss word around me, then we can't be, that's silly. Right. I mean, it's a funny story because he and I have really fun relationship and have worked through hard things before. He's actually that family member that I just said that we restored after 12 years. I'm now encouraging him. I'm telling you, you got to go check it out. Like, they've changed, they've grown, because he and I had similar experiences, and we've been able to encourage one another. But you can't expect that everybody's got to act exactly the way you act. You have to really be careful about, like, are they treating you the way that you want to be treated? I think especially with the political climate we've had the last couple of years, where it's like, oh, if you talk about XYZ, we will not be. And that may be a line for you. And if it is, that's fine. And you may ask, hey, I would rather us keep family dinners more kind and compassionate. And so I don't really want to talk about politics. But just because somebody doesn't act exactly the way you want them to, be careful.
Agree. And if they don't, it's worth that self-exploration of, well, what is it in me that's triggering it? It's not about them. It is, again, what is it in me? Like, you have to get down to the bottom of that. There were so many things that I'm trying to be aware of our time. There were so many things that I wanted to just point out. But I do want to hear a little bit more. You mentioned about after your book came out, all of a sudden, which is self-development, you started to have some panic attacks. And I don't know if this correlates or not, but I did pick out one thing in the book that I loved about behavior. And you had said, I thought accomplishments would make me feel better. Nothing worked until I changed my opinion about myself. Does that correlate at all with, like, your panic attacks? Because writing a book, getting it out there, going through all of the self-development and all the work that you have done, those are huge accomplishments. The panic attacks would make sense, right, beforehand, and then talk about that.
Yeah, my daughter is the one who helped me make sense of the panic attacks, because she said, for years, you have been open about your story, but you have been able to modulate and control who knows about, specifically, the area of my stepdad, which when you publish this episode, you may want to put a trigger warning, because I don't mean to be in a place where I would accidentally trigger somebody, but all of a sudden, somebody could walk up to me at a cocktail party and be like, oh, hey, I had a terrible stepdad too, and all of a sudden I'm not prepared. I'm not braced. What I know now, because I have done deep dive for the last year and a half into my nervous system, is that those panic attacks were simply my body saying, I don't feel safe. And my therapist helped me a lot with that, because even before I actually pressed publish, we talked through fear of failure, fear of success, those sort of things. If you buy the or the paperback version of my book, you'll see that it's published by CBC Global, which is a joke company that my best friend and I came up with years ago, that said, if we ever went into business together, it would be Crazy Blonde Chicks, and we would be CBC Global. How may I help you? And so the reason why it's CBC Global is the, DBA that my publishing company is because if anybody says anything bad about me on the internet, my best friend is willing to, like, come to my rescue, come to my defense, not rescue, but, like, I'm never going to be in it alone, because she is part of the publishing company, even in just name only. That was one of the ways that we tried to get my nervous system to be under control, is like, if all the people on the internet say that you're a horrible person, your best friend, I mean, family, they kind of have to love you, but your best friend, she got you. She gonna rail on that internet troll with you. And so, but I now know that it was really just my nervous system going, this is dangerous. This is terrifying. This is scary. What are you thinking? You are putting this out there where everybody on the planet is going to know about your stories. Funny thing is, they don't know all the stories. my college friends read the book and were like, oh, good, you skipped college. So anyway, they don't know all the stories, but they
You
do know
blocked it
all
out is what you did, right?
the
No memory.
yeah, I'm sure at some point I will have a book about the self-inflicted pain that we cause on ourselves as a result of our, our trauma. But anyway, so I now know, and I am a huge believer, I'm a positive thinking fanatic. I call myself an evangelist for positive thinking. I firmly believe your thoughts create your feelings. But here's the step that I missed for many, many years is there's a biological response before your thought. Often when your body, your mind perceives threat, and it's like you've watched the Animal Kingdom where the little zebra ears are twitching. It's like your nervous system is twitching. This is dangerous. And it sends a response, and it can feel like a gut punch. It can feel like your heart is racing, or you're sweating, or your head feels all, whoa, all of that feels like Charlie Brown in your head, right? And all of that stuff, those sensations, I think if we will clearly label those as emotions and realize that emotions are a biological, physiological response to perceived threat. And there's also a biological, physiological response to perceived good too, right? When we see somebody we love and that joy that wells up in us, when we see a baby and we just all of those good, those yummy feelings in our body, emotions in our body. So many of us as children were told, quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And so we were told that we couldn't feel those sensations. We shouldn't feel those sensations. And so I think that with those panic attacks, what I would do now, which they've started again. It's awesome. I was like,
Well,
great, you're writing a book
right?
about now they're much less of a degree than they were. They're much less. No one else knows I'm having them. My daughter would be like, are you running? I'd be on the phone. Are you running? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I wouldn't even tell her I was having them. Now I can just feel them. And instead of like going, oh no, this is terrible, I wrote a book that has a chapter called Address Fears and I'm having a panic attack, I go, when I'm on a good space, I still have days, but I go, okay, I see you. What are you doing there? What are we feeling? What's going on? What can we do? What do you need from me right now? Oh, you just need me to breathe for a minute? Okay, I'm just going to breathe for a minute. And it's gotten a lot less. I've also, made sure now that they've started back again, then, and I was hoping they wouldn't, but I've got my caffeine. I make sure I get lots of sleep. I get lots more exercise. I do all of the physical things that I need to do. But I think that we as humans want to avoid those. We want to numb them because we were told we shouldn't have them.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, I mean, I even see this in my parenting, and these are things that I've went back to my kids and had conversations with, because when your kids are suffering or uncomfortable, they're crying, they're hurt, they're sick, whatever it is tough because we do feel for them. Mm-hmm. And I got my own emotions over what's happening to you. Now I got to deal with yours too. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just teach our kids how to manage and deal with their emotions? And then when we're adults, we know how. And I love the fact that, I mean, you mentioned, I'm still having some panic attacks. It's not that I'm going to do all this work and it's, life is going to be perfect and everything's going to go away. But now when you get them, they are less severe. And you can ask yourself, why am I getting this? Like, what are these panic attacks telling me right now? Mm-hmm. What do I need to do? Oh, I do need more sleep. Solution. Mm-hmm. I do, and less caffeine. Maybe I need some exercise. Maybe I need more connection with people. And we can start to do things. And instead of stuffing it down or numbing out or avoiding. And because that stuff, it leaks out. I mean, it does. Mm-hmm. It leaks out at the people that, really don't deserve it. The people that we love the most. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. And if you don't address it, I mean, it will show up physically. If you continue to stuff it, I last year went on a health journey where I lost 30 pounds, and so much of it was tied up in emotion and unforgiveness. And it was where you were literally protecting your body by having that extra weight. And if it doesn't show up in weight, then I've been working with some clients recently that have just some medically unexplained pain and some odd symptoms, some neuropathies and different things. And it's your body trying to tell you something. And if we can just pause and listen, I mean, we think it's going to be a check engine light that says our engine's blown. And sometimes it's just the gas light that says you need to stop and get some gasoline. Right. And so when we over catastrophize, oh, I'm sweating, oh, all these things, my heart's racing, then it makes it worse. And you drive right by the gas station instead of stopping to get gas. And so, yeah, just pausing, listening to yourself. It takes practice. It is not fast. It is not easy. We have a whole society, a whole culture that says numb, 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 feel good, feel good, feel good. And our brain is wired for survival. We want to feel good. We want to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and be really efficient in that. It's motivational triad. So you have to just slow yourself down and just be, as you say often, check your relationship with yourself.
Right. And also with that, it's that instant gratification of, I feel bad. What am I going to do right now to get through this feeling? And so we do reach for something really quick, and it might help in the moment, but then it's worse the next day. And then it all compiles on itself. And before we know it, we are so stuck. We do feel almost just hopeless or powerless. How do I get out? And it all kind of goes back to, though, the self-awareness of, okay, here I am again. It's okay to have these feelings. I mean, I almost feel like we're in the state where we're brainwashed to think like, oh, well, it's bad to ever feel sad. It's bad to feel mad. It's bad to feel this. No, it's awesome to feel that stuff, because all of those feelings and emotions are trying to tell us something. It's trying to tell us what to do, what not to do. It helps us in our decisions and what to pay attention to. And we don't want to feel those things if they get uncomfortable, and it's hurting us. It's not helping us.
Yeah, depending on what your faith perspective, this may or may not be helpful to you, but I think it's instructive, even if you just recognize that Jesus was a rabbi and a great teacher. But there's a verse in the Bible that says Jesus wept. And if you look at that story, it's in the middle of the story where Jesus, the next verse, after he wept, he raised Lazarus from the dead. So he recognized, and I believe he demonstrated for us, that we must feel our sadness. Like, they took the time to say Jesus wept. He was sitting there with Mary and Martha, and they were very sad that their brother had died. And he knew his next action was he was going to raise him from the dead. Mm-hmm. But he still paused and took a moment to feel those feelings before he then felt the joy of raising Lazarus from the dead. So I think that's a great model for us to use, and we do have to just pause. Even if we know it's going to get better, even if we are going to assign meaning to this, even if we are going to, develop resilience because of this pain, we still can take a moment. And if you haven't ever taken a moment, I think we have to revisit some of our previous wounds that when they come up and we trigger the danger signal is because we have wounds from before that we haven't sat with. And so saying to that 8-year-old little girl, baby girl, that was terrible. Oh, bless your heart. That's hard. That's hard. I know you're going to get through it. I know that you made it. I know it all worked out fine. But sweetheart, that was hard.
Yeah. So. I agree. And you really almost have to go back to go forward. You just can't stay stuck back there. It's a reflection. It's like when you're driving in the car, you're checking your rearview mirror, but you're not obviously keeping your eyes fixated on there because, but you have to reflect back a little bit to go forward. Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time. So tell us where we can find you and about the book coming out and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you will go to angelabelford.com, you can actually download Be Freaking Awesome for free. And that will get you on the mailing list to get updates on when the next book is coming out. You can also find me on my podcast with the same name, Be Freaking Awesome, where we kind of unpack some of the things that are explored in these books and also bring fantastic people. Jamie has been on the podcast before. We really expose people to ideas that maybe they haven't thought about. I didn't know I had abandonment issues. So we talk about it. We talk about branding. We talk about masculinity, all sorts of fun things. So lots of variety to give people new things to think about and explore.
Yes, which is amazing. It's part of growth, right?
Absolutely.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope we can have another conversation again. This was great.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much for being here as we kick off this podcast together. I really appreciate you joining me on this journey because I'm well aware you could be doing or listening to anything right now. Hey, if you enjoy the Authentically Raw content, please support the show by following, rating, and reviewing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can also follow me on social media for daily inspiration. Head over to my website, jamieberris.com, to sign up for weekly transformation tips. Or if you're interested in coaching, I currently have 3 openings for one-on-one coaching. If you're looking for an empowering community, we'd love for you to join us in the Transformation Tribe, our group coaching membership. More info available on my website under the Life Coaching and Membership tabs. One last thing, I'm rooting for you. Be real, be raw, be authentic.